I use or kind of break all of your marketing efficiency down. And all 5 of these need to play in harmony to gain efficiency. So content, right? Content's pretty self-explanatory, and we'll talk about, different forms of content. But content could be your website, it could be your sales material, it could be webinars, it could be podcasts, it could be social media, it could be your email list, et cetera, et cetera. Customer marketing would be, how are you getting your customers to adopt and grow? And then paid media would and advocate to under customer marketing. So how are you leveraging your customers to market and grow more, right? Instead of just like going after net new and just focusing on net new, how do you use your customers to grow? But then also, how do you use your customers to help you with net new as well? Let's jump right in. Thanks everyone for being here live. Really appreciate you taking time out of the day. I do not take it for granted. I'm really going to be laying out hopefully a lot of valuable information and insights that I've learned over 10 years of being in B2B marketing. And really the topic of this webinar is really all around efficiency. You can see grow efficiently to 10 million ARR and beyond. And that keyword efficiently is really what I'm going to be focusing on a lot today, because as we've seen, especially if you're in a SaaS business or a lot of other businesses, throwing tons of money at marketing can work if you have a certain model. But in general, all of us, especially in 2023 with the overall economic environment we're in, et cetera, everyone's really looking to grow efficiently. And from my experience working especially in smaller businesses and in bootstrap businesses, that's been primarily my career. I have spent some time in VC-backed businesses, but primarily in bootstrapped. And so I've had to figure out how we really maximize every dollar we spent. So let's jump right in. Kind of some of the outline for today's conversation. We're going to be talking about really the problem we're experiencing. We're going to be talking about kind of a new growth mindset, going into some go-to-market fundamentals, 5 marketing programs you can leverage to grow your go-to-market and your marketing in general, and then 11 mistakes to avoid that I have experienced and things I've done that you can avoid. Another thing here to notice is we're going to do a Q&A at the end. So if you have questions, throw them in the chat throughout the presentation. We'll get to them at the end. And then also we'll be doing kind of an additional section that if you want me to audit your website for kind of some of these attributes and some of these ideas, I'm happy to do that. So throw your website into the chat if you want me to do that towards the end, and we can definitely do an audit live of your programs and give you some feedback on where areas I think you should invest in regards to everything we're talking about today. So let's talk about me a little bit. Just joking, we're not going to talk about me at all. My name is Taylor Wells, though. I'm with GTM News is my media company. It's all around providing insights and go-to-market insights and fresh content, kind of what's relevant in the go-to-market space. Go-to-market is marketing, sales, customer success, product, right? All the different departments that help your organization go to market. I'm also the founder of Potential Opportunity, which is a boutique marketing agency. So who's this for? Just kind of highlight a couple things here. This presentation is really for folks that you don't have a predictable marketing machine that's generating new opportunities for you, right? You're kind of just always scrambling for new opportunities, always scrambling for new campaigns, and you don't have anything that's predictable or consistent. You're a CEO, maybe you're a founder, you're in marketing or a sales professional that's focused on pipeline and revenue goals. You're trying to tackle pipeline shortfalls and are ready to change growth tactics and strategies to win, and you want to grow efficiently and at the right cost. So if you're any one of those things or are interested in any one of those things, stick around because this is for you. Let's talk about the buyer's journey. I want to kind of do some context setting, and I'll let Chris Walker, if you're in the B2B space, he's a great person to follow, an interesting agency he has around for SaaS companies. But I was listening to an interview the other day, and he had this quote, which I think was really interesting, where he talks about, B2B customers are in control of the buyer journey now. So if you look back 20, maybe 30 years ago, without the internet, without communities, without Reddit, without social media programs, without really the access to so much information and content, B2B customers had to rely on trade shows, had to rely on salespeople to get them the information. That's completely changed now. And I'm gonna share some stats here in a second about how the buyer is, before they even talk to sales, before they even interact with you, are doing most of the buyer's journeys before that now. And the buyer is in so much more control, right? They can reach out to their peers in different communities to get feedback on your pricing, on how they like the tool. They can use, so much of things I find nowadays are through social media, right? And so a lot of the traditional, even some of the things like, using Google and stuff like that are changing, especially with AI. And I don't could spend probably a whole hour talking about that, how our buying decisions are changing. But overall, we're seeing this huge shift towards the buyer being in control. So how do we match their expectations, number one, but then also how do we serve them in that, right? How do we actually find out where they're living? Because the traditional tactics of maybe leveraging trade shows or events heavily, or leveraging your sales team and outbound, not that any of those things are bad. It's just the tables are turning where those things are becoming less and less effective because the buyer's expectations and journey are changing. So let's talk about some stats. And these are really the problems that if you're dealing with marketing problems or getting new opportunities, these 4 stats I think are the main reasons why. So number one, 85% of the buyer's journey happens before sales. This is a Forrester stat that they came up with, that 85% of the buyer's journey happens before sales. So think about that before they even interact with you, right? Their majority of their buying decision, their buyer's process, their research, their evaluation, their consideration happens before they even talk to you. So your position of authority and power to influence that buyer's decision at the sales, when they reach sales, is just very limited. It's 15%, right? So now we have to switch our buying sales process to be really before pre-sale, right? When you're thinking about before they get to sales, is how can you match that? Another interesting stat here is 95% of your target market is not in market for your solution right now. Another Forrester stat. So only 5% of your market, so if you look at your TAM or your target market, whoever you're going after, only 5% of it is actually in market right now. So this is something to think about when you're creating demand versus just capturing it. A lot of our tactics, whether it's even SEO, right? Like search engine optimization, or even outbound, where you're trying to just capture the demand and see if people have that problem. Only 5% of the market is actually going to be recognize they have a problem and they're actually searching for a solution or it comes to mind. So we have to switch our mindset from just capturing demand, right? The tactics of capturing demand, but then educating people, building that relationship, making them aware of the problem they have, not just see if they have the problem and then try to close them from there. Another stat here is 5,000 plus ads is how many ads your customers see every day. Forbes stat here is just crazy, right? Like we're exposed to so many ads, so much promotion. And so whether you're running ads, whether you're doing outbound, whether you're doing content, whatever you're doing, events, whatever it is, you have to work that much harder to stick out, number one. And we're going to be talking about philosophies and mindset that I've used to help you stick out better. And then last but not least is 264% is the average marketing and sales spend of high growth organizations under 5 million. This stat is pre-2023. So I know that's gone down. You look at a lot of organizations are spending less on marketing and sales just because they can't afford to, or they're not getting the return on investment they want or need. But if you're a small organization under 5 million, or even if you're a larger organization, your competition is probably spending a ton of money on marketing and sales, and a lot of your total revenue. So that's 264% of your total revenue. So if you're at $1 million in revenue, your competitors may be spending $2-3 million a year on, if they have the same revenue as you, on marketing and sales, if that makes sense. And so once again, we have to get more creative with how we go to market, because all these channels, not only are people getting so many ads, your folks aren't in market, your buyer's journey is changing, but then also, your competition is spending a ton of money on marketing. Just pulled a stat. Salesforce just released their quarterly updates on investments. I'm really curious, especially these big organizations. Salesforce, I think their revenue is $30 billion a year, right? Crazy revenue compared to probably most of folks on this webinar workshop. What's crazy is that they still spend, last year they spent almost 50% on marketing of their total revenue, $30 billion. They spent like 40 something percent on marketing and sales. 40%. So just think about that, how much they're spending on marketing and sales. Now they're down to 38%, right? They're pulling back because of the economic situation. That being said, there's, for a large organization that they're a category leader, right? They are established in the market. they're still spending way more than probably a lot of organizations are on from their total marketing and revenue. Obviously, they're a SaaS company. So if you're not SaaS, if you're a service company, you probably don't have those gross margins that can afford to invest that much in marketing and sales. That being said, there's competition is stiff. Your competitors are probably spending a lot of money. And even the large players are still, compared to their revenue, B2B large companies, compared to their revenue, are spending a lot of money. So something to consider. Let's talk about some go-to-market fundamentals. So before we get into the marketing portion and we talk about different strategies and mindset and how to do marketing better to really gain that efficiency, there's some fundamentals that I've learned over the past couple of years working in different businesses that if you don't get these right, you can do all the best marketing in the world and everything's going to fall apart. So let's jump right into them. Unit economics is number one. So I actually just did a recent interview with Sam Jacobs. You can head over to GTM.news to listen to it. Sam Jacobs is the head of Pavilion, great community I'm involved in. He has a unit economics spreadsheet that he goes through, basically business financials, right? Like the core financials of your business. If you don't get these right, first, if you're a marketer or a salesperson, you need to understand these things so you can have a seat at the table. Number one, you can understand why we have revenue goals, and then do those revenue goals actually match up to your marketing spend, right? And that correlation is super important, because you can never advocate and invest more if you don't understand that correlation. But then also, if you're a business leader or just a founder or CEO, having these ratios, in place are super important, because for a lot of different reasons. But first one, unit economics talks about a couple different factors, are things like CAC, cost of acquisition. So what is your cost? How much does it cost to acquire a customer? To LTV, which is your lifetime value. You can look this up. Lots of information online about this. 3-to-1 or 5-to-1 ratio is best practice. What that tells you is that how much your cost to acquire a customer versus how long they stay, right? And if that ratio is off, you're spending too much, or your customers aren't sticking around long enough, right? They're churning, et cetera, et cetera. And that's really important to have. A payback period is another really good way to look at. And your payback period is basically how long does it take you to pay back the marketing investment. That should be under a year, is another best practice you can look up. Those things that affect both of those numbers are like churn and gross margin. So you look at CAC to LTV ratio or payback period, your churn and your gross margins are hugely important. Those two things have really nothing to do with marketing. Most marketers don't think about churn and or gross margin, but churn, are your customers sticking around? How long do they stick around, or how quickly do they leave? If you have a high churn rate, you can have all the best marketing campaigns in the world, but your brand awareness will be diminished, because all of your customers will be telling future customers or prospects that they shouldn't buy, right? Because the product sucks. So churn is super important in regards to like your marketing efficiency, because at the end of the day, like I talked about earlier, the tables have turned, right? We're not in control. Sellers and businesses are not in control of the buyer's journey anymore. The buyers are in control because of the internet, because of the switch of information, et cetera, et cetera. So if you have a high churn rate, that's going to affect your marketing campaigns. That's ultimately going to diminish your efficiency overall. Gross margin, right? Gross margin is how much does it cost to deliver the services? What's left over, right? What's left over after delivering the cost of goods? If you're in a software business, you probably have a really high gross margin, right? If you're in a service business, it's not going to be as high. Or if have a physical product, it's probably not going to be as high. Those are going to affect how much you can invest in marketing and how efficient you need to be. And so that's kind of all plays into. So figuring out those unit economics, highly recommend go and listen to that conversation. We actually go through the spreadsheet with Sam Jacobs. Just go to gtm.news and you can watch that. So super important to get those right, because once again, everything falls apart if you don't have your unit economics right. And if you don't figure out the why behind your revenue goals, your marketing budget, all that fun stuff. Completely switched my mindset when I became a marketer. I was like, oh, okay, this is not about driving leads or driving revenue even. It's actually, do we have an effective CAC to LTV ratio? Do we have a good payback period? All these other things that coincide and make sure you can effectively grow. Another thing to consider is your go-to-market will be different if you're in a PLG. That's product-led growth. Another concept. Product-led growth is essentially using your product to to gain new users and go to market. So product-led examples of that would be like a freemium model or a self-service model would probably be the best way to describe that, where they don't need to go through a traditional sales-led process, right? Where they have to talk to a salesperson, they have onboarding, they can go sign up online, right? Slack or a lot of tools have that component of it. SMB motion, marketing go-to-market motion, would be more like selling, a $5,000 to maybe $100,000 or maybe a $50,000 annual contracts, right? So that's a kind of SMB value price point, and so that motion and efficiency is going to be different, right? You're gonna go to market a little bit differently, and then your payback period is going to be differently. Probably your churn is going to be differently. So just there's a different playbook for that. And then enterprise, right? Large contracts over 100,000, 100,000 into the millions. That has a completely different go to market, and then also how you think about ultimately the efficiency and marketing and your costs and all that fun stuff changes too. Other things to consider would be like multiple products. Are you a land and expand model, right? Where you go in with a small product and expand. Those things are all things to consider when you're building out your go-to-market, when you're building out your marketing and really to achieve efficiencies, making sure you match all of your campaigns and your marketing to whatever motion you're in. Your ideal customer profile. So this is something that a lot of companies, my business, I'm continually evolving. It's like an existential crisis, a constant existential crisis of who do we serve? Why do we serve them? And really narrowing out your niche in the market. We'll talk about that in a second here. Super important though to have that figured out and to continue to refine it, because once again, lots of competition in the space, people inundated with ads, everything is getting saturated. Ultimately, we have less control over the buyer's journey, right? If you're not talking to the right person, if you're not identified who is your best fit, who do we make the most money and who gets the most impact from our service, right? Whatever that is, whatever that sweet balance between those two things are, figuring that out is crucial to being efficient, right? And the more you can narrow that down, and we'll talk about that in a second, the better. Unique selling propositions. This is a fancy way of saying your competitive advantage, right? What differentiates you in the market? If you are a commoditized product, right, or service that everyone else has, then ultimately it's going to be really hard to grow efficiently. And I'll talk about how in the companies I've worked in that did have a commoditized product, how I had to really think outside the box to grow efficiently. And I do have some tactics for that we'll talk about here in a minute. But the unique selling proposition is really all about, it can be like, I'm targeting a certain audience, right? I only serve this industry. I see a lot of people moving into that, right? Where you're a SaaS product for, it's called vertical SaaS, right? Where you're a vertical, you only have one industry you serve, right? Versus a horizontal where you serve a bunch of different industries. And that way you can kind of focus your product in that area. So you make your product better, number one. But then number two, you're also able to, your marketing messaging becomes that much more differentiated, because when you go to market, you're like, oh, you see a lot of ads for CRMs, but I never see an ad for a CRM for, this specific industry, excuse me. So super important to have that unique selling proposition where you have that differentiator. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that you have the most unique product in the world. It could be that you just serve a specific vertical that no one else serves, right? Another thing to consider are, how much runway do you have? So how much money do you have in the bank to invest in marketing and sales? In general, best practice I've seen is you want 3 to 4 sales cycles for your marketing campaigns to achieve efficiency. So if you're starting today and you have a 90-day sales cycle, you should expect 9 to 12 months for your marketing campaigns to gain efficiency. And that's with everything going well. A lot of those campaigns aren't going to go well. So that's best case, right? If you have a shorter sales cycle, you probably can get efficiencies faster than that. But in general, it takes time, right? It takes time. You have to be patient when it comes to marketing, and it will take a while to ramp up these new initiatives. So do you have enough runway with your campaigns? Do you have enough money in the bank to fund these initiatives to make sure you survive? And then last but not least, benchmarks are helpful, but not perfect. Find your benchmarks for you in person. Even these benchmarks up here, like LTV to CAC and payback period and stuff like that, those are great, but there's so many specific things to your unique scenario. So if you're a brand new company, It's hard to benchmark yourself against yourself, right? Because you don't have the data. But if you've been around for a couple of years, use that data to kind of make estimates for the future. Benchmark data in general, you can use it, but the devil's in the details, right? It's going to fall apart at some point because of your unique situations. Awesome. We just talked about a little bit about your TAM and about niching down, or your ICP and your ideal customer profile and your unique selling proposition. Well, here's a concept for you in regards to really niching down or niche down. So you've probably heard about your total addressable market, your service attainable market, and your service attainable and obtainable. This is like looking at, you kind of break down your target market into these three categories, and you kind of get smaller and smaller. Well, I recommend you go even further to finding a market that no one else is in, right? And finding your product, that your product may be unique. If it is unique, that's great. But at least, especially for starting out, until you gain product market fit, until you're probably over 10 million or 20 million in revenue, and you have repeatable systems and repeatable success, is to really niche down as much as possible. Get crazy with your niching down. And that is like one of the most powerful ways to differentiate yourself in the market and gain efficiencies. Let's talk about a counterintuitive growth mindset. So this is something I learned, especially working in bootstrap companies, is really how to think about growth in a different way. So Winning by Design, great company that does B2B consulting for a lot of large B2B companies and SaaS companies, learned a lot from them. They have this great concept, which is to achieve recurring revenue, companies must deliver reoccurring impact to their customers. So in other words, if you want customers to continue to pay you, you need to continue to provide value, right? It seems like a simple concept, but I love how they phrase that, right? And especially for reoccurring businesses. If you're in B2B and you're in reoccurring business, SaaS or service, to achieve recurring revenue, you have to have that reoccurring impact, right? So that's a baseline. So what I propose is that, what if we provided impact before the prospect became a customer? So I'm going to stop there for a second. Let us all digest that. Essentially, the concept is, before they start paying you and before they expect impact, what if we gave them the impact before they became a customer? So product-led growth, right? Like self-service, free trials. It's kind of that similar concept too, right? Where before they even enter their credit card, before they pay you, they start receiving value from the product, right? They start getting impact, and you build that trust with them. Well, I am saying, from a marketing standpoint, from a sales standpoint, from a growth standpoint, what if we gave them impact, actually help them solve a problem before they became a customer? So this can be through content. This can be through consultative selling, right? Consulting, when you're meeting with a salesperson. We'll talk about a bunch of situations here. But this concept right here has changed the way I do marketing and sales, because it ultimately looks to serve folks before they ever become a customer, and you build rapport, loyalty. We'll unpack it here as well. So this is that kind of new mindset, and I've coined this term selfless advantage. So and we'll kind of unpack what does selfless advantage mean. But really, it comes down to the golden rule, right? Jesus of Nazareth said, just as you want others to do to you, do the same for them, right? And it's that golden rule of really showing empathy, but going one step further to that. And here's this definition that I think can be helpful for us. So selfless advantage is a growth mindset where you use selfless empathy. So let's unpack selfless empathy for a second. Selfless, right, is the definition of it. You go look it up, is basically not being selfish, right? Putting other people's interests before your own. And empathy is putting yourselves in the other people's shoes. I will argue that the best marketers and sellers out there are super empathetic. The problem with it is, if you're just empathetic, guess who else are just empathetic? And they use it to manipulate? Psychopaths, cyber criminals. Really successful criminals in general are very empathetic. They put themselves in the shoes of their customers. So a way to take it one step further is I'm advocating that we should be empathetic, but we should also be selfless in that. And so when we put ourselves, it's a superpower to be empathetic. It's a superpower to put yourselves in the shoes of somebody else, right? You gain an advantage on them where you can see the needs they have, and you can kind of point them and mold them in the direction you want to go, because you're putting themselves in their shoes. What I'm advocating for is that marketers and sellers and go-to-market in general, marketing in general, should be selfless with that. So we have that superpower, right? We put ourselves in their shoes, we figure out what the needs they are, and then we provide an impact and serve your prospects without expectation. So this is really hard. And even I don't think it's impossible to be 100% this direction, but I think in general, I don't know about you all, but I don't have a problem being selfish. I have a problem being selfless when it comes to marketing, when it comes to sales, just life in general. So balancing it out a little bit, right? Where instead of just my criteria is what's in it for me, how can we actually serve folks and what's in it for them and everyone winning, right? Obviously, we have a business to build. We have profits to make. We have bottom line profits and all that fun stuff. But I will argue, and I've seen it time and time again, especially from marketing, that if you overweight on the selfless, you gain all the profits, you gain the best customers, and you win in the end too. So I don't think I've never given too much, and it's harmed my profits. It's all or harmed my growth. It's always only benefited us, and ultimately it builds that rapport, right? In turn, you build rapport and trust with your ideal customers. And this go-to-market mindset, it's when your organization, when your go-to-market strategy becomes your organization's first product. It becomes a product in and of itself. Your sales, your marketing, everything you do becomes a product where you're actually, once again, delivering impact before they become a customer, right? And if you can do that, it unlocks the most efficient growth you'll ever have. And it also is super rewarding because you can serve people, you can help people, right? You can help way more people, number one, which is super rewarding, but it also helps yourself in the long run. I do think, though, I will caution everyone that ultimately you have to do it without that expectation. Because the minute you're like, oh, I'm gonna, squeeze my pitch in there or whatever, and not to say you shouldn't sell or you shouldn't position your product or you shouldn't ask for the deal or whatever, but the minute you kind of try to manipulate the process of actually helping somebody, you take the life out of this whole mindset. So what's interesting about this is really interesting is that this can actually be your competitive advantage. So I was at this company called NW Techs. They're an MSP, managed service provider. There's hundreds of thousands of them out there. Honestly, we had a typical product service that everyone else had. We weren't that differentiated. I tried to work on that as a marketer, as a side note, and tried to make our product more unique and try to work with the product team and the service team to how do we make our product more unique so that when we go to market, we're more differentiated. But it was a struggle because there's just an evolution of the business. And so I had to work with what I had. And what I had was a very commoditized product. There's thousands of people out there doing it. And so what I had to figure out is, how do I outmarket everyone else? I didn't have the budgets to do it. So I didn't have the budgets and I didn't have the differentiated product. So I actually had to do better marketing. And so what I did was did tons of webinars, did a podcast, did blogging, gave as much content as possible, actually solving a problem, right? Versus, ultimately all the other forms of marketing. And it worked. It was incredible. We were able to achieve incredible marketing efficiency and incredible growth and get great customers and grow even in a hyper competitive, hyper commoditized product. So it was amazing. And it completely changed how I view marketing and sales and growth. So let's talk about a couple other examples here. You can, once again, provide an impact before a customer becomes a customer and you build trust with them. Here's a couple ideas for you. Content marketing that actually solves a problem, not just sells your product. I definitely think you need product marketing and, case studies and all sorts of like content that convinces your buyer to buy your product, right? I don't think you need that. I just think in general, it should be like a 90-10, right? Where you're just giving. And people want to come to you. Like they want to work with you because you're so generous with your time and your resources and you help them already. They just naturally want to work with you because of that. And another mindset shift too is a buyer's process versus a sales process, right? Once again, switching the narrative around how do we think about it from the buyer's perspective versus just our sales process. Advertising that's helpful, right? Actually putting ads out there that help people. Most ads are very called direct response, right? Getting somebody to take action. Whereas what if your ads actually just help people and super powerful way to do it. A sales experience that provides value. Unfortunately, I dread getting on a demo call because most of the time I feel like I'm being manipulated. There's very little value, and I have to grind my teeth to get through it because I want to get the product or I want to get the outcome down the road. But the process sucks in general, and that's no fault of salespeople. I think it's the systems that we've built to be extremely selfish for the company versus selfless and actually serving people in every part of the go-to-market process. Another thing here is frictionless buyer experience, right? So whether it's buying online through a PLG motion, right, self-service, or whether it's self-starter, just reducing the friction for the buyer. Other ways to reduce the friction is like book a demo online, right? Or pricing online, or a self-service option, or product-led growth option. So all these things reduce friction. They create a better buying experience. Don't take my word for it. Go research online, all the stats that show all these things. Interesting stat that McKinsey put out last year was that 25% of B2B buyers were willing to spend up to $1 million online with no sales process. They're willing to go do an e-commerce experience, right? Go buy up to $1 million online, 25%, 1 in 4 people. So obviously 75% don't, they want to talk to a salesperson if they're going to spend that much money. But one in 4, that's crazy. Like I would have thought, maybe 25,000, maybe 50,000, maybe 100,000, but up to $1 million through an e-commerce self-service option. Mind blowing when I saw that. I was like, wow, that's crazy how, things are changing so much. But we're seeing it, right? Obviously, the evolution of Amazon, with the evolution of so much like instant gratification, and also so many options out there. Like people have a million options to solve a problem these days. There's a million platforms, not literally a million, but you know what I'm saying. Or they can continue to do the traditional way. There's all these different options out there. And so how do you reduce friction? How do you make the experience better? How do you give and build rapport, differentiate yourself before you ever even ultimately, before they even sign up as a customer? Okay, let's talk about some programs here that I think are really helpful. So these are 5 marketing programs that kind of the thing about your marketing. And these are the 5 buckets I use, or kind of break all of your marketing efficiency down. And all 5 of these need to play in harmony to gain efficiency. So content, right? Content's pretty self-explanatory, and we'll talk about, different forms of content. But content could be your website. It could be your sales material. It could be webinars. It could be podcasts. It could be social media. It could be your email list, et cetera, et cetera. Customer marketing would be, how are you getting your customers to adopt and grow? And then paid media and advocate to under customer marketing. So how are you leveraging your customers to market and grow more, right? Instead of just like going after net new and just focusing on net new, how do you use your customers to grow? But then also, how do you use your customers to help you with net new as well? And tons of options. I think customer marketing has been one of the most underinvested areas of marketing I've seen. And it's definitely an investment. It's a long-term play, but great efficiencies. And I would say really the top 3: partnerships, content, and customer marketing. Those 3 areas are the most efficient long-term ways to grow. And if you can layer on paid media and outbound, if you can dial in those top 3, you will be super efficient. And then ultimately add on paid and outbound as a way to supplement those things, because ultimately content and customer marketing and partnerships, if you get all those things right, paid becomes way easier because you have great content, and you have great brand awareness through partnerships and customer marketing. Outbound becomes way easier because they've seen your social media post, or they've seen you gotten referrals from, or your customers are advocating for you, or you have partners that you're building brand awareness in. And so outbound and paid media becomes so much easier. Those are the 2 channels actually folks go to first, usually when they're doing marketing, because they're the fastest to get some sort of result. And you'll get something if you do them quickly. But in my experience, they're usually have diminishing returns. And they're also the most saturated, super saturated markets because of how quickly you can start up and how many people are in it. So let's break down content marketing and content in general. So number 1, and this is kind of, once again, going back to the selfless advantage, right? Number one, content that solves a problem without your product. So you build rapport with people, you build that relationship with them. And that you can use that through subject matter expertise, another fancy word for thought leadership, right? Are you providing subject matter expertise to help them solve a problem? A lot of content out there, especially that's focused on generating leads is really good at getting people to opt in, right? Giving your email address, but not so good at actually delivering impact and value. So what I argue is it's okay to do gated content, but make sure you actually deliver the impact, deliver the value from your content, actually solve a problem. Because if you don't, you're missing out. Ultimately, you're missing out on a phenomenal opportunity to build that rapport with somebody. But then you're also missing out on really ultimately the end goal of content, which is to build that relationship, to build rapport, getting email addresses, getting leads. I mean, you can buy contact information super easy these days. And, people, when they put in their email address, they're not expecting you to come reach out as a salesperson, right? I mean, they probably are now because it's happened so much. But the problem with that is there's no value exchange at all. It's like if the content sucks and they're not getting any value, and then if somebody reaches out and sells them something, it's just a poor experience, right? It's not ideal. What if you were to give them value through the content, get them opted in? Maybe you have a newsletter that continues to provide value. And then as you see the person is consuming your content and enjoying your content, then maybe you reach out and be like, hey, I saw this was helpful. Our platform can help you even more, right? And that's really where this content becomes really powerful, is like, hey, we've already helped you solve these problems. Are you interested in helping you solve more problems, right? And actually, the best type of content is when they come to you afterwards, right? And I've had year over year, I've had people, reach out and be like, hey, I've watched 3 of your webinars, or I saw you on a podcast, or I saw your content on LinkedIn, or whatever. And it was probably multiple touch points over a period of time. And they reached out to me, right? They booked a demo with us. That is a power change, right? You now are in control of ultimately the experience, in that they're asking you for help, not you asking them for a deal. Hope that makes sense. Another form of content you can do is content that shows and validates how you solve more problems through your product, right? Product positioning, etc. I think most companies are doing this or have doing this. The best way to do this is to interview your customers and get the words they say to help create this content, right? Don't guess. Don't be like, oh, I think we do this, or I've heard we do this. Actually get the words your customers say and use that in your content. And that will make it so much better, right? That's like a copywriting hack in general when you're creating customer facing or customer content that's designed to help people convert, is use their actual words, right? And huge advantage there. A couple of things to think about, quick tips here. Things that I would do and have done or do for my clients, et cetera, is one monthly webinar or virtual event and a weekly podcast. Through that, you'll have enough content through repurposing and through whatnot to fill up all of your content. So that's what I do. I do a monthly webinar for my own business. I do a weekly podcast, and I had tons of content repurposing for all of my social networks, right? Through my email list, for blogging, for everything. And through those mediums, I create a ton of content, which then can help and serve people, right? I build that rapport, I build that relationship, and I have people regularly coming to me being like, hey, can you help me with this? Or can you help me with B2B marketing? Or can you help me with content, et cetera? Another tip here is if you need an expert, right? If you're not an expert, if you don't have that subject matter expertise or that unique point of view, get them, right? Get them. So my podcast, GTM News, it's like a media company show. I interview other experts, right? I throw in my opinions there and my thoughts throughout the conversations to hopefully make it interesting and have them make it a conversation. But I get other experts to come on, right? And so you can invite those people on and interview them. And now you're creating helpful, impactful content that you don't have to do, right? That you don't have to necessarily come up with it. That's been groundbreaking for me, whether it's a webinar or workshop or whether it's a podcast, right? Where you ultimately help people by leveraging other thought leaders in the market. Repurpose, create once and repurpose it a bunch of different ways. So this is another hugely underutilized way, is that you create a webinar and then it just goes on your website for an on-demand webinar that no one probably watches. Take that webinar, like what I'm going to do with this webinar is I'm going to send it to my podcast, right? I'm going to repurpose it into my podcast so people can consume it there. I'm going to probably cut up a bunch of different clips and post it on social media. I might turn it into a blog post. I'll probably turn it into a carousel ad that I can put on LinkedIn or somewhere where people can consume it, the deck. I actually posted this deck on LinkedIn earlier today so people get a sneak peek of this webinar and get some last minute registrations. So there's a million and one ways to repurpose it. The key is create great content and then figure out how to repurpose it in the ways that people want to consume on the different platforms. You can even repurpose it to run ads. That's also crazy too. Like I just saw BlackRock, huge, billion, I think they have $1 trillion in assets or something, huge financial institution. They take their podcast and they run ads on LinkedIn. And I literally screenshotted a video of them running the ad from their podcast on LinkedIn, which is such a great idea, right? Where you have helpful, really insightful guests that come on. You're now using that to promote your business online. And then next level is create your own media company. So this is like the future of content marketing, the future of inbound, the future of all of this is really creating your own media company. And that's why I started GTM News. It's outside of my business potential opportunity. It's a separate organization that I can create content, create an audience, right? People can go online and subscribe to it. I have a newsletter of hundreds of people that get it every week. And it's a way for people to consume content outside of this. Another examples of that is like HubSpot bought The Hustle, which is a newsletter, podcast, a bunch of stuff. Salesforce started Salesforce Plus. Another great thought leader in this space is Anthony Canada, with Audience Plus, and he's building a software platform that allows you to build your own media company, essentially. Super cool. That is the future because ultimately, I don't have time today to talk about it, but if you're interested in talking about that more, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to answer questions. Or if you want me to talk at the end and with Q&A, happy to do that as well. Okay, a couple other content ideas here for you is your resource section on your website is probably a mess. Here's how to think about it differently. Inbound versus outbound, right? Inbound historically has been about how do you put content out on all the different channels, right? On Google, through SEO, on social media, on YouTube, whatever, and get them to come to your website. What owned media does, creating a media company, is that you are the destination. You are the place where everyone wants to come and continue to consume content. People come to you. You might promote it on all the channels, but you become a center where people want to consume content, and it's basically the differences between owned media, could be your website, could be webinars, virtual events, video podcasts, and newsletter, versus rented or earned media. Rented media is like you're renting it from Facebook when you run ads, or earned media is you are earning organic media on SEO or on social media. And so this, once again, is the future of content marketing, hands down. It's having its moment this year for sure. And you're seeing so many companies invest in this because it's way more efficient to build your own media company than it is to try to rent it or earn it from somewhere else. Cool. Customer marketing. A couple ideas here for you: adoption, retention, expansion, advocacy. Leslie from Sendoso, she's the head of customer marketing there. A great framework I learned from her on this. I should have quoted her right here. But essentially, these are the areas that you can use marketing to help your customers adopt, help them retain, help them expand, and my favorite, which is advocacy. How do you get your customers to ultimately advocate for you more through reviews, through different programs? I have this quick tips here: LinkedIn Ask for Referral campaign. So this campaign is where essentially you use your salespeople to connect with your customers on LinkedIn, look in their networks to ask for specific introductions. So this is where you can, it's super powerful. It's like you actually ask for an introduction versus you're like, hey, do you have any referrals? No one ever has any referrals for you when you ask that most of the time. But when you ask them, hey, can you introduce me to so-and-so? Way more powerful than asking for referrals. Make sure you have good reviews all over the web. Get video testimonials if possible. Another great way for advocacy. Partnerships. I could do a whole nother webinar on just partnerships. Partnerships are folks that have a similar complementary product or maybe target the same ideal customer as you, and you can do co-marketing, co-selling, co-inventing, ecosystem and channel marketing. All these are super important. Where I would start is pick 3 to 5 potential partners that are slightly ahead of you and offer to create content for a co-marketing campaign for their audience. So you create the content, you come to their audience, present it. If you're starting out, start there. You can expand there to do co-selling. You can expand there to do co-inventing, like integrations and things like that, or ecosystem marketing. Do everything though. If you're just starting out, find 3 to 4 partners out there that have bigger audiences than you, that are slightly ahead of you, offer to create content for them, for their audience, and tap into their audience and their network. Huge, awesome way to gain efficiency. Outbound, couple tips here is the goal is to create conversations, not book demos. So if you create a conversation, most people ask for meetings, right? Super fast. Create a conversation. Have your CTAs, your call to actions, be, basically trying to communicate them over email. And another way to do it is use the outbound to inbound method. So this method is basically where you're inviting people to content. So for example, if you're sending a cold email, invite them to a webinar, right? Invite them to come on your podcast or come on your webinar and be a guest speaker, right? Instead of just asking them for a meeting, whatnot, use that channel to do something that really no one else is doing, which is inviting to a webinar. Softer, I have a friend, forget his name, he calls them micro commitments. And I love that, where you're getting smaller micro commitments, right? Of like, hey, come to a webinar or watch a webinar. Another ways to gain efficiency is social selling. I hate that term, social selling. Essentially what it is using social networks like LinkedIn or Reddit or Twitter, where you interact with your customers on those platforms through commenting, through not sending sales messages, but basically engaging them where they're at, right? Commenting and liking their posts, and sharing content, right, on those platforms, versus just going in and doing a direct response, asking them for a meeting. Account-based marketing integration. So account-based marketing is a fancy term for basically looking at a specific account, right? Your specific company that you want to market. Use outbound as a way to integrate with your paid ads, with all the other things we've talked about to really be complementary. A couple quick tips here. I get a 90+% acceptance rate on, and I've probably sent out 10,000 invites in the past 5 years or whatever. And I get 90% acceptance rates because I promise not to send any sales messages. So I literally, my opening line is, hey, promise I won't send any sales messages. Here's why I'm, reaching out. And it gets a laugh. People love it, number one, but it's also counterintuitive, right? It's approaching the platform in a different way because so many people are inundated on LinkedIn with sales messages, which I'm sure you are as well. And another quick tips here, invite folks to webinars or other forms of content. Cold email tips. So if you're doing cold email, you're just starting out, don't use your primary domain. So set up a separate domain, a secondary domain, because chances are you could ruin your domain and affect the entire rest of the organization. DMARC, skim, are kind of best practices for domain setup. No links, no pictures, no tracking in your initial email, because those get flagged by spam. And then short subject lines and bodies. Keep your email super short, 1 to 3 words on your subject line, and then 2 to 3 sentences, maybe 4 sentences max in your body. Paid media. So like I talked about before, is easy to start, but most expensive long term. So great to layer on top of great content, partnerships, customer marketing, and outbound. So paid media is still great, but it's so expensive, and you have to be very sparingly, especially if you're a small company and you're trying to grow efficiently. Use it as a way to supplement and add on to make all the other programs that much better. Quick tip, run zero-click content as a way to nurture your folks. So this is that BlackRock example, right? Huge financial organization where they're putting clips of their podcasts, running ads to that. That's what zero-click content is. Zero-click is they get value and impact without clicking. They don't have to go to your website. They don't have to go sign up for something. They don't have to go download something. They don't have to go read your blog. Zero-click. They stay inside the app. People go to the social media platforms to consume content there. They don't go there to go consume it somewhere else, right? So as much as possible, create zero-click content, create the actual post, the words, whatever it is, to actually provide value in-app. And then if there's additional content, like, hey, for example, I promote my podcast and I put little clips on social media, but then I'm like, hey, if you want to listen to the rest of it, head over to my website, right? So zero-click content, super impactful. And once again, it's a way to nurture people over time. It's going to be hard because you're probably not going to get the initial results of like people signing up immediately, but over time, you'll build that relationship with people. And then they'll be like, oh yeah, I saw a bunch of ads on LinkedIn, or I saw a bunch of your podcast on LinkedIn. And then when you reach out outbound, or you reach out through customer marketing or whatever, it's gonna be that much more efficient. Cool. Couple in the last 5 minutes before we get to Q&A, a couple of things to consider here. Mistakes I've made to avoid attribution and measuring success. So if you need to measure every single thing, or if your CEO or your board says, hey, every dollar we spend, we need to have a measurable outcome, you will fail at efficiency, because so much of the most efficient ways to grow are hard to track. Customer marketing, partnerships, content, those three areas, really hard to track. There's leading indicators you can track, but really hard to track until you start actually getting good results from it. So that's why outbound and paid media is so attractive to people, because it's really easy to attract, and that's why everyone's doing it. But hence why it's also super competitive and not efficient. So keep in mind that there's ways to do like self-reported attribution. There's ways to get more qualitative insights versus quantitative insights on what's working and what's not working. But you have to push back on, hey, we're going to do great marketing and we're going to do a lot of it, and over time, this is what we should expect, right? So another mistake I've made is not understanding the why behind your revenue goals and marketing budget. This goes back to unit economics, right? Figure out that why. Why do we have these revenue goals, and why do we have this marketing budget? How does this all fit into the business objectives and goals? Focus on generating leads versus generating demand. So if you're focused on just generating leads for your sales team, you're going to miss out on a ton of opportunities to generate demand, which is actually what you want. Leads are a means to an end. Leads don't solve your problem. What solves your problem is people that need your product and actually want your product, and that are qualified pipeline or qualified customers. So generating demand, right? People that are like, hey, I'm interested in your product, is different than leads, right? If you're focused on leads, MQLs, people are signing up for stuff, whatever, it's just, you're going to miss the mark, and you're going to miss out on tons of really efficient ways of nurturing people, like zero-click content, right? There's no leads involved in that. It's just actually providing value to your ideal customer without getting the leads. And then over time, you build that relationship and you help people with nurturing. Not making selfless content. I've talked about that a bunch now. If you're just making content that's all about you, your brand, your product, you will not be efficient. Guaranteed. Thought leadership, subject matter expertise is a non-negotiable in your content. If you're not creating that, you will not be efficient, and you'll not grow the way you want to. Not being patient, like I mentioned earlier, make sure you have enough runway. Make sure you have enough time to ultimately get things off the ground, because it takes a while for marketing. Marketing is riddled with failure, which I'll talk about in a second, but then also the time to success rate timeline is long. Sales teams measured on different KPIs in marketing. So if your sales team and marketing team are measured on different things, if they're not both measured on revenue and qualified pipeline, you'll have a misalignment and ultimately a friction between the two. Sales will be like, hey, let's do more outbound. You'll be like, let's do more content. If you guys are both on the same page, you're both measured on revenue, you'll work together to how to bring those things together and ultimately be more successful. Not handling failure well. Like I mentioned, I think if you're a salesperson, you've probably experienced a lot of failure, right? Marketers, I'd argue, experience even more failure, because so much of what you do doesn't work and you have to keep trying. So handling failure well, knowing that a lot of things aren't going to work. And I have to remind myself even every day, right? I'm like, oh, why didn't that campaign work? Or why didn't that work? And it's like, not everything's going to work. And you got to figure out what does work, double down on that. But then also continue to evolve, which is the next one here, not taking risks to innovate. Things change. I mean, like I've been in this industry I've been in B2B marketing for like 10 years, and it's amazing how much has changed. Every year, it seems like there's something new. Things are changing. Things aren't working the same as they did. And so you have to innovate. You have to try new things, especially to gain that efficiency. Not prioritizing and saying no. Oh my gosh. Like if I could pick anything, as most marketers, sellers, any sort of go-to-market motion, we do too much. We do too many different types of campaigns. We do too many different types of things. Figure a couple things out that you really want to focus on. Do those really well. And I mean, this is probably a good life lesson for everyone, and myself included, is focus on a few good things, do them really well. Because a lot of times there's literally hundreds, if not thousands, of different ways you can market, things you could do for marketing. Pick a few things, do them really well. And you'll find, because it just takes a while to figure it out, right? It takes a while to crack it. It takes a while to figure it out for your organization, etc. When the product sucks, but they blame marketing for lack of growth. So this is where you have to have, a call to Jesus moment with your team of like, hey, is our product actually helping people? Are we churning too much? Do we have our NPS scores, or however you measure customer health? Is it actually working? Because if it's not working and your customers aren't happy, you can do all the marketing in the world and it's gonna be really hard to grow efficiently. So, and then last but not least, not educating non-marketers. So if you're a marketer or you're leading marketing organization, you have to educate internally. I saw a study that only 5% of board members have a marketing background. And so most board members don't have any marketing backgrounds. That trickles down to every department, I think, and every leadership position where a lot of people don't know marketing. And so a lot of these concepts I've shared today, maybe new to you, and they're definitely probably really foreign to the rest of the organization. So whatever you're doing, invest in educating. And the mistake I've made is like, hey, I'm going to try this new thing. And then I didn't take the time to invest in the rest of the org, didn't take the time to educate my CEO or educate the rest of the executive team. And I didn't get the buy-in. And when things got rough, they wanted to cancel it, cancel the program, et cetera, et cetera. So get that overall buy-in from the rest of your org. Awesome. Q&A. Anybody have any questions? I know I went through a ton of information here. Is there any questions anyone has? And if you don't have any questions, that's okay too. If anyone wants to ultimately do that audit, if you're brave enough to come on, throw your URL in the chat. Something new I've never done before. So love for you to be a guinea pig if you want, but happy to provide some insights on your website, on insights to your different marketing, your campaigns, et cetera, et cetera. And awesome. Looks like I got one question here. Let's get to the questions here. Oh, got more questions coming in. Awesome. Let's get... Can I see the video offline with my mates? Yes, you certainly can. So I will share the video in the webinar later. Anthony says, you mentioned using a separate email domain for cold email. Would you recommend a subdomain or a totally separate domain? Great question. I would recommend a totally separate domain. Subdomains still, I'm not an IT expert, but from what I understand is they're still tied back to your main domain. So keep it completely separate. And ultimately, keep it completely separate. So that's what I recommend. You can do some more research with lots of cold email outbound folks out there. But from my understanding, keep it completely separate. And also warm it up too, Anthony. So it takes a while for a domain to gain credibility. So ultimately, you got to warm it up. You also have to warm up your inboxes as well. So you don't just want to send out 150 emails at once or whatever. You want to send out a few emails, and there's warm-up tools you can get out there. But ultimately, like if it's not a domain that hasn't been around for a while, that's gonna spark a red flag for the different email providers. So you want to warm it up. You want to be a subdomain, and then warm up your individual email addresses as well, making sure that they're warmed up and they're established. Right, you're getting responses from people, et cetera, et cetera. A way to warm it up is to actually like send and receive emails. So that's how it shows credibility, right? This is actually best practice for email marketing in general, is get people to respond to your emails, because it shows the email provider that you are a credible inbox, that people are engaged with your emails, and that you're not just spamming people and annoying people. Tyler asks, hey, Tyler, nice to see you on here. Tyler asks, how do you stay up to date on changes in the marketing industry? Good question. You can follow my podcast, gtm.news. I talk a ton about marketing there, go to market in general. I'm always bringing up thought leaders that are kind of relevant to the day and age, right? I did a webinar on owned media with Anthony Kanata, right, from Audience Plus. Did one on unit economics, customer marketing, partnerships. Actually, everything I talked about today, I've talked to leaders on my podcast, in my show, because I'm trying to keep up to date, right? So I'm picking their brain. I'm like, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Even outbound, right? Like I had an outbound person come on. I had a sales development person come on. So I use it as my own personal development, but I also try to give like, hey, what's happening now and go to market, what's happening in marketing that is relevant and up to date. Other folks I would follow would be, I'm trying to think of anybody else on LinkedIn that has a lot of good insights. Pavilion's a great group. I'd be involved in. If you can, it definitely costs to be involved in, but I've learned a lot from them. That'd be the main other one I would recommend. So any other questions, folks? I know we're right here at the top of the hour. Hope this was helpful. Once again, like I mentioned before, we will be doing. I'll send out the recording and the deck and all that fun stuff, so you can watch it over again. And then you'll also be receiving my newsletter. So for future events and also for our podcast, you'll be automatically subscribed to those. So expect to get those in your inbox, and for any future trainings I do, and also for any future podcast episodes I release and all that fun stuff. So thanks everyone for joining me. I hope it was super helpful. I really do try to practice what I preach and do the Selfless Advantage, right? And give as much as I possibly can. So I spend a ton of time on this. If you do have specific questions, reach out to me on LinkedIn, shoot an email to me as I follow up with the recording. Take care, everyone. Thanks for joining.